Now more than ever, the path to justice rests in our ability to address racial and economic justice, and coalition building is the vehicle.
I echo Dr. St. Louis's sentiment and expressing my thanks and appreciation to the Planning Committee and to the following co-sponsors, without whose assistance and cooperation this day may not have been realized.
We know oppression has taken thousands of years, hundreds of years to build. We're not going to get out of this in one conference, but we can build the relationships, build the trust, so we can continue the road of liberation, continue to organize and wage liberation until we are all free.
As we reflect on the current upsurge in the progress being achieved in the labor movement, we are fortunate to have a scholar activist of this caliber addressing our conference.
I also want to thank the late Jose Soler. In order to understand the problems that labor has today, we have to understand that by and large, it doesn't accept history and it doesn't study history. So problem number one, it fails to make the distinction between the labor movement and the trade union movement and looks at the two as the same, and they're not. Africans were brought here as indentured servants, yes, as indentured servants and as slaves. In the beginning, it was primarily indentured servants, right? Brought over here. They didn't come voluntarily. They didn't go down to the Atlantic to book passage to New York. They were grabbed, right, and brought here. And they found themselves in the 1600s immediately immersed in class struggle. This is really remarkable. 1741, and the Irish are identifying the oppressor as white. Now, I've been to Ireland, I see what they look like, and I know that they are not very dark, which meant that the issue of whiteness was not about skin color. It was an identification with a group of oppressors. The construction of a racial settler state has completely deformed class struggle in the United States. We have this really bizarre situation where you can have very militant white trade unionists, deeply committed to unions, deeply committed to fighting capitalists, who are just as deeply committed to a white supremacist vision of the country. The history of workers of color has been largely, up until the 1970s, was largely erased.
Welcome to the first panelization of the conference.
One of the paradigm shifts that I had to have as a researcher and clinician is that health is more than just the absence of illness. Mental health is more than just the absence of mental illness. A lot of the work that we end up doing, and even some of the treatments and policies that we develop, are often reactive. It's about treating something once a bad thing has already happened. How do we get people to access care? How do we make sure that people have doctors? How can we make sure that they have the money to get that treatment? When really part of our work could be shifting that perspective to how do we keep people well in the first place.
So I do believe that Black women need and deserve quality mental health treatment, but what I also know is that it's not all in our heads. So much of our suffering is related to a lack of access to resources and a lack of personal control and efficacy in our day-to-day lives. So my work is really born out of that insight and a desire to identify vehicles and levers of social and economic empowerment for Black women. First, unions improve wages and benefits and reduce both racial and gender inequality in the workforce. And second, unions change the conditions of work for Black women by giving them greater say over their workplace, their workloads, their safety, and other aspects on the job. A strong labor movement reduces economic inequality, which really is the soil in which racism, xenophobia, and authoritarianism take root. Thank you.
The healthcare clinics that are available to immigrant workers are underfunded, overburdened, and have extensive wait times. And it's difficult for workers to access healthcare. just period. He was getting a lot of, issues with being able to even just access workers' compensation, which is something that everyone has a right to, regardless of status.
Whites and blacks say at comparable income, educational, or occupational points, you see a class gradient for both populations, but at each comparable point, blacks or other racially minoritized populations tend to do worse. I think that all roads lead to the same direction, right? That this is the organizing challenge before us, the health outcomes of the nation as the whole for racially minoritized populations, but even for populations supposedly protected by white privilege, need the protections of workers' rights and the labor movement.
When we keep being shown that no one is coming to save us, how do we take our own steps to improve health, because we keep being shown that they're not gonna come?
Part of the challenge is we don't get help until things get too bad, and then we end up in the emergency room in crisis for things that could have been addressed in the community.
This all goes back to how the law, can both erect barriers and eradicate barriers. So you're seeing how cyclical this works. The whole purpose behind the Voting Rights Advancement Act is to correct the deficiencies that were laid out in the Supreme Court decision in 2013.
When I think about unions, to me, what are they really about? They're about community, they're about solidarity, they're about having a safety net. We have created a system where even though the mythology is education, pull yourself up by your bootstraps, you do well in school, and you will have all of these other opportunities available to you, we know in reality that is not the case. And that is the other piece I think we need to be vocal about as well, right? Making sure everybody is acknowledging exactly what their path has been. We've all been trying to create our own private safety net because these structures, these supports are not there for us right now. But I think together we can help rebuild them. So that's what I have for today. Thank you.
That was true with Brown versus Board of Education, right? The southern states just refused for many, many years.
All deliberate speed.
Right. And I don't know all the details, but it was more than a decade, right, that it took for many of these states to comply.
We know that the economy does not work if there is not care work. So how can we connect families, working families, to affordable quality childcare as well as elder care? And there's going to be a huge need for that in the near future.
You can have skill sets and enjoy what you do and do whatever field you feel like, and it's not that you have to conform to gender roles. And so in our industry, we have people in the construction department, people in grip and electric, in these very more so technical roles that we are increasing and encouraging women to be able to become a part of in my union.
We don't need to assume that they're gonna leave here and go become a doctor or a lawyer. Like maybe they're gonna have an education but go into a trade and then become a manager, and so I think that we need to think bigger, right, about the ways in which we're teaching young people about that.
There is no easy answer. You have to do the work. This is Union Organizing 101. Go back to the basics, knocking on doors, having face-to-face conversations with people. We have to elect union members. We have union members who are not even registered to vote. So that not only are they not voting, they are not registered to vote. We must take the time. We are no longer in a pandemic. We cannot use the pandemic as an excuse. We have to get out of our classrooms, out of our cubby holes, out of your offices. We have to talk to each other.
What would you like to see in a worker-owned dispensary in your local area? And what is important that a dispensary that focuses on social equity and repairing the harms of the war on drugs, what is important that you see from this dispensary doing to fight against these? And we were able to get a lot of great information from the community.
The enemy is the company. The company wants to take your healthcare away. You know, the company wants to reduce your wages, all right? The company wants to send their jobs where they can make more money. And it's not the whites, it's not the blacks, and it's not the Latinos. When I came in, I said, let's get to know each other, all right? And I said, I am here to win the best contract for you and the members of this local, okay? And the only way we're gonna do that is we have to work together. And if we don't work together, you guys are, bringing up stuff and, we have no unity on the other side, all right, then we're going to run into problems.
And most organizations will only cover the federal recognized. We will cover state recognized as well, or even if you're not a tribal member and your mother was or your grandmother, we can still help you.
Que tenemos el mismo pensamiento.
So we need to both gather ideas, to look for alliances, and to unite us with other people who are struggling for the same thing.
Because we know that when we work together, everyone wins. And so if we're going to uplift and support our workers just based on the contract, we need to do the same in our communities, even though, especially those communities that are really disenfranchised and marginalized based on economics, based on race or whatever, you know what I mean? We all know our area and what we're living in.
Our problems are deeply connected. If we are going to fight for them, it doesn't make sense for us to fight separately, because what's going to happen is those folks that are in power, the folks that we're trying to get something from, are going to be like, I just gave it to them. What do you mean? Somebody just came and asked me for that thing, and what, you all didn't talk or agree? So we're like, all right, great, we didn't talk. We're talking now. We're having that conversation now.
The Poor People's Campaign is organizing at the state level and the national level to address the interlocking injustices of systemic racism, systemic poverty, ecological devastation, the war economy and militarism, and the false moral narrative of religious nationalism.
All this immigration, regardless of the stats, can apply for the state's university, like Jesus University, and not pay over than they need to pay.
Our intersectionality is reality. We gotta let that be known. And for all of us, it has to be known. It has to be real. And we have to be audacious enough to push it across. And we cannot be silent anymore.
Wages were going up at the same rate of productivity throughout the entire time period that we had high union density. As union density drops, you'll start to see that wages stagnate while the productivity keeps rising. So we want to make sure that we're doing our part, because it doesn't just affect your shop. This affects even workplaces that aren't unionized, as they're going to then have to compete with unionized shops in order to maintain their workforce.